So to the final part of today's session, and this specifically has got to do with personal development, what you can do to improve how you engage the public in your work. I'll start this particular section by sharing an experience I had with you, which I think is extremely important and telling, and certainly has been extremely critical to my development as a communicator. I mentioned earlier I'd been working in the laboratories, and I'd been working with a chap called Professor Dougal Gardner. And one day I was called into the office. Now, I knew something was going to happen. I knew it wouldn't end well. So I went in to see him, and he said, "Sit down, MacArthur." He always called me MacArthur. "I've got something to talk to you about." Now, I wasn't sure what he was going on about, and I didn't know if I'd made a mistake or if he was cross about something. He said, "Right, I would like you to take charge of teaching the Year 3 medics at the University of Edinburgh College in Chemistry." Now, I remember the feeling, I'm getting the goosebumps again. I remember thinking, oh my goodness, what on earth is going on? But he asked me to do it, and he wasn't the sort of man that you could say, no, I'm not going to do that. So I agreed that day that I would teach third year medical students college in chemistry. So for the next 8 weeks, I went along like a good little student, and I taught these 23-year-olds. This was me. I was 23 as well, so these were peers of mine. I taught them college in chemistry. And I have to be honest and say it was one of the worst experiences of my life. It was just terrible, and awful experience. I didn't do a good job. I came out shattered every time I did it. And at the end of the 8 weeks, I honestly would have rather done anything than do another public talk. Then Dougal asked me to come into his office. Now I thought, he was the sort of man who was quite difficult, and I honestly thought that he may send me home permanently at that moment for not doing a very good job of these lectures. But he didn't do that. He asked me to sit down, and he said, okay, and he always had these glasses at the end of his nose like this. And he said, okay, Scott, he said, give yourself a grade. So I was like, I'd really rather not. It was just terrible. He said, no, A to F, give yourself a grade. So I was like, okay, give myself an F. I failed. I was terrible. I never want to do it again. I feel sorry for the students. I feel sorry for me. It was just a terrible experience. I just do not want to do it again. He said, right, okay. And he got the glasses back in the end of his nose, and he said, can I give you a grade? And I was like, okay. And he thought for a couple of seconds, and then he said this. He said, the grade I'll give you is not yet. Now I remember the feelings I had at that point. I was like, what's he talking about? I wasn't sure. I thought, well, okay, he's not sacked me. That's a good thing. And then I started to realise that what he was doing was teaching me a lesson. He was saying, okay, there's maybe more to you than you've just demonstrated whilst teaching college in chemistry to Edinburgh University third year students. And if I'm honest, that experience for some time went to the back of my mind. Then, just 5 years ago, I presented at TEDx Warwick. Now this was a fascinating event. It was a big event. There was 3,000 people there, the famous red dot, and I presented a piece called Why Facts Don't Change People. And it went really quite well. It got filmed. Dougal couldn't come. I now called him Dougal because the professor had become a very good friend. He couldn't come because he was so old. Ironically, he was an orthopaedic specialist, and he had orthopaedic problems, so it was a real shame, but he couldn't make it. But I then sent him the video that was made that day, and he called me and he said, okay, I'd like you to come up to Surgeons Hall. At this time he was the president of the Scottish Surgeons Hall in Edinburgh, and he asked me if I would come and see him. So I went up to see him. I walked into the restaurant, and his son David was there. He took me to the chair, and here's the photograph I took that day. David took that day, sorry. And Dougal, just like that, 93 he was. Again, the glasses were at the end of his nose, and he looked at me and he said, okay, give yourself a grade. So I just laughed and said, there's no way I'm giving myself a grade. Absolutely no way. He said, well, okay, can I give you a grade? And he did it again. The glasses went to the nose and he said, I'll give you an A. And I remember the feeling I had like it was yesterday. I felt delighted, happy. I wasn't a child, but it was a real moment where I felt very positive about things. But then in true Dougal style, with these glasses at the end of the nose, he just looked at me and he went, but. And I knew right away that what he was doing was trying to teach me a lesson, that I could always do better. I could always be better. Even when I got quite good at something, I could always be better. So what's the lesson there for everybody? Well, hopefully you got the fact that it was a story I've just told you. It started off with a call to action, almost a hook that I said I knew this wasn't going to end well. That creates curiosity in your head, and I'll come back to story in a minute, but that is the sort of thing I want you to start thinking about. Now, I'm quite often asked by people, where do all your stories come from? Well, they come from my life, and I've spent best part of 20 years gathering stories. The reason I do that is, one, I think people feel that it's your story. You can't tell someone else's story unless you're an actor, a very good actor, but you can't tell someone else's story with any degree of authenticity. So I think you need to find your own stories. It doesn't matter what age you are, it doesn't matter what level of experience you've got. If you want people to see you as authentic, it's time to start thinking about getting involved in telling stories. Tell them internally, tell them to your family, practice those stories. It can really, really help engage your audience. So what else is there to really think about in terms of putting stories together? I structure my stories in a particular way, and I say, when people ask me about, how do I then take that, almost like personal archaeology and structure it? Well, I have in all my stories a golden thread. So I have something, a soundbite if you like, a key soundbite that I like to focus on. And no matter what I do with the storytelling, I always bring it back to that particular point that I want to tell. Now, this is really important because it makes sure that the key message is projected to your audience. Now, you'll have seen politicians do this usually quite badly, but the best presenters in the world are the ones that can really get straight to, or to a point via a story, and land that story. So that's quite important. The other thing that's important, and this often surprises me, there's two parts to it. Again, I'm often asked by less experienced speakers, how do you become a successful speaker? And the answer I give is always the same. It's this: speak. If you're a professional speaker or a professional communicator, you have to practice. You can't just lift it out and deliver it. You have to actually practice this stuff. So again, if you're trying to communicate, you're wanting to be a better communicator, you have to find opportunities to actually practice communicating. Now, I have a saying as well that I add to that, and I say you should be able to rehearse your speech or your communication or your lecture or your filming, whatever it is, rehearse it to the point that you can ad-lib. Now, what you don't know is I've had a problem recording this today, and I recorded the whole session today, and it turned out there was a little glitch in the camera, which meant I couldn't use the footage. So I've had to redo it. But you know what? I've rehearsed this, so this isn't as difficult as it could be, because I am at the point now, what I'm doing, I'm following my golden thread, and all I'm doing is adding stories and experiences and giving you references, etc., to make it clearer, to make it more powerful, to make it more engaging. And that is how you use the golden thread, your key points, your sound bites, and your rehearsal to nail your messaging on the head. Now, there's been some interesting developments in this space over the last few years. And one of those developments has been a realisation that what the scientists have been saying, what the psychologists have been saying about how we communicate, and the fact that we need to use stories to communicate, actually confirms what the writers say. They've been telling us for years that the best way to communicate is through stories, and now the science is backing that up. Now, quite a famous piece that was written by a chap called Will Storr. Now, Will's a journalist, and this book called The Science of Storytelling is really, really helpful because he frames it in a way that's conciliant. So as I was saying earlier, there's different themes coming from different sciences and disciplines, and what's one person once called magisteria. So you've got the arts as well as the sciences, all kind of suggesting that storytelling is a great way to help you engage better with your the public. So let me again build on what I've been talking about in terms of using the science, using the fact that we know how to structure a story much better these days. I was doing my second TEDx talk not long ago in Telford, and the subject was, who is paying for your attention. So it's not a bad title, but I knew that if it was going to be successful, I had to catch the audience. I had to do something right at the beginning that would grab them and engage them in my talk. So this is how I started my talk, and here's my talk here, and you can have a look at it, and I'd love to hear your feedback. But what I said was this. I said, I'm going to tell you a story about my grandfather's foot. Now, I'm not sure what's going through your head, but I know in the audience I could see the heads turning, going, whoa, what's he talking about? And what I was talking about was how my grandfather kept himself alive effectively by writing to me every week over a period of 30 years. After he had the onset of angina, and he was basically housebound. And I have got a foot deep, 30 centimetre deep pile of letters from him. So my talk was about those letters and how he paid attention to the world and then communicated it to me through those letters. But that was an unexpected beginning to that story. And again, I urge you to think about when you're communicating your findings or your methodologies or your intentions or your grant applications, think about how you can present something that makes the audience engage with you right away. When you're writing a story, begin with something that they don't expect. But I also urge you to take this seriously. Do your archaeology of your stories. Test the stories. Choose the ones that resonate best with your audience, not just your colleagues. Then practice. Build that into your activities, your daily activities. This is even more complex than doing a poster or even getting a paper published. You've got to think about what the other people are thinking about and what they need. There's a beautiful saying in poetry that says that listening is like touching at a distance. Listening is like touching at a distance. And I think that draws out that skill of being able to listen really, really helps. And let me help you with that with another tool. This is perhaps one of the most exciting developments over the last few years, and that is that our linguists and our social scientists have been able to test things using social media that they've never been able to do before. Now, one of the social media sites that I'm not so keen on is called Reddit. And this is a place, it's a discussion forum effectively, and people go there to discuss everything from what it's like to be short and why everyone should have a beard. There is some ridiculous and trivial things on there, but there's other things going on there that are really, really interesting, and one of those is testing a methodology that tries to improve how two people or two groups, and in a real example right now, two countries, can work better together and can have a better conversation that creates a better outcome. Now, I said a moment ago that listening was like touching at a distance, and I think that leads nicely to this. And this is called the Rapoport process. Now, Rapoport was a game theorist back in the 70s, and he had this idea about how to structure a conversation. Now, it's so obvious that it's one of these things, it's almost like a paradox. It's so obvious, but no one's doing it. So I'm going to take you through it very quickly, but I want you to think about how you might be able to use the Rapoport process and where. So the first step, and it won't surprise you if you've been listening, the first step in the Rapoport process is to listen. But you've got to listen to your interlocutor or your opponent to the point. Having asked lots and lots of questions, having clarified what they're saying, to the point that you can actually repeat back to them what their idea was or is or their belief is almost better than they can. Now, can you imagine how difficult that would be to do with most people that you work with who don't agree with what you're thinking? It would be imagine taking that into the Parliament and getting, you know, opposing sides, whether it's in the United States, United Kingdom, trying to get them to actually ask questions to understand why that economic model was the best model, to understand why that approach to racial equality was the best way to do things. It would create havoc, but the evidence is that this works. And if you want to read about something that's in this space, or you want to listen to a story about it, I've included a little podcast here. And in that podcast, you have two characters. One is a head of the Ku Klux Klan, and the other one is a rabbi. And the rabbi uses this technique to bring the head of the Ku Klux Klan towards him. And that chap who used to be in the Ku Klux Klan, after a year of being subjected to the Rapoport process, is no longer part of the Ku Klux Klan. Now, before I go on to the second stage, I'm going to go off on a slight tangent. You remember my golden thread? So I'm going to go on a slight tangent. Now, I said earlier that one of the things that's really important is to be able to visualize your story, you know, be able to summarize things, to be able to draw things, to cut across some of the noise. So I'm going to ask you to do something, and it's this I normally do live, and it's a very powerful technique, but I think we can do it on video. So I'd like you to bear with me and just see if you can do it. See if you can suspend your disbelief just for a few minutes and do this exercise for me. Now, I promise you, in 30 years of working in organisations, trying to help them move towards the new future, they're aspirational. This exercise is probably the most powerful one I've ever given to any organisation. So what I'd like you to do is to close your eyes. That's you too. Come on, close your eyes. Trust me just for a minute or two here, guys. Now listen to my voice. What I would like you to do is to think about something. And what I'd like you to think about is a dog. You got a dog in your mind? Can you see a dog? Can I see you nodding? Yeah, well done, well done. Then what I'd like you to do is, I'd like you to put that dog into a yard. So in your mind, you can see a dog in a yard. Can you? Good, thank you. Right, open your eyes, thank you very much. So you've all done that. Thank you for doing that. I know it's funny and weird, and I hope you didn't try that when you were driving. Nevertheless, you can now hopefully see a dog in the yard. Now, not everybody can do it. There's some people who have great difficulty visualizing, but most people can. Okay, so let me think about what I think you can see. Dog. Right, now, my prediction is that most of you have seen a dog that you have met before. So it could be your dog, it could be a dog that you had when you were growing up, your relative's dog, your girlfriend, boyfriend's dog, a dog that you've seen on the television. It could be Lassie or the Dulox's dog or whatever manner of dog it is. I would imagine, well, I know from this experiment, I've done it many times, the majority of you have seen a dog that you're familiar with. So let's think about the word yard. How has that gone into your head? Now, it's a more difficult word than dog, because in the likes of the States, a yard is a garden. In the United Kingdom, for many people, it's a kind of Coronation Street yard with cobbles and bricks, or it can also be a builder's yard. So in your head, some of you may have got it a bit confused because there's a bit of dubiety in the language, but in your head, again, if you have seen it as a garden, I'd put money on that you saw a garden that you've been in or that you visited. And that experiment is so powerful. It's not only a fun thought experiment, it's a very important thought experiment. Because what happens when you extend that question and you say to people, okay, think about the word, a good one, strategy. People have got no idea what strategy means. If you go around 100 people, they'll all give you a different definition of what that word strategy means. Profit, difficult, complicated for some people. One of the more ridiculous ones in the corporate world is value add. If you add ask 100 people what that means, you'll get 100 different answers. And I always say in that environment, unless you get the dog in the yard right, unless you use the first step of Rapoport, asking questions to the point that you really understand what they can see, there's no point in doing any more of this process. This is a superb technique for checking understanding and making sure that you're communicating something to your audience that they actually understand. So let's get back to the Rapoport process. So the first stage was listen to the point that you can repeat to them better than they can themselves what their particular perspectives are. The second step, now this gets hard. The second step is to say, okay, I now understand what your beliefs are, I now understand what your perspectives are, and you know what? I've learnt something from that. I've learnt this, this and this. Now that isn't always easy, but that's the second step. Step 3. Step 3 can be even more difficult. This third step is to say, okay, I understand, I've learnt something. The third step is to say, and these are the things that I agree with you on. Now that can be really difficult. If someone's really far away from your beliefs, they've got a really different perspective to you, that can be a really, really difficult one to get your head around. The final thing is to say this. Okay, I'm at the point where I'm quite clear when I stand on your perspective, and my view is this, and my view is this. And the evidence is that if you use that little four-step process, the outcomes are much, much more likely to be positive than you do the usual arguing type of discussion with people. It's a very powerful technique. It's been used now in Jerusalem between the Palestinians and the Israelis. It's been used in Africa to try and persuade people to stop killing the big five. This is a powerful method and something I would strongly advise you to think about as you develop into someone who communicates with the public and gets the public to engage with your work in a much better and productive way. So I'm going to end with a final thought, and this is about how you come across as a professional. And I'm going to make it funny, but it's actually really quite serious. Do you know what one of these is? I'm sure some of you know what it is, and it's a Dementor from the Harry Potter books. It's one of the main characters, and the Dementor sucks the joy out of somebody. And I would put money on, if you're anything like me, you've been a Dementor. You've come into the office and you've been in a terrible mood and you've been negative about what's happening and you're not happy with this and you're not happy with that. Well, do you know what? A bit like smiling and yawning, being down like that is also infectious, and the public and the people out with your department will see it even clearer than the people inside your department. So don't be a Dementor. And if you remember, what's the cure for the Dementor's kiss? It's not the Patronus. The Patronus scares them off. What's the cure for the Dementor's kiss is actually chocolate. So if you're ever feeling a bit angry or a bit grumpy, or you meet someone that's grumpy, give them some chocolate and tell them to go and have a break. It can help restore a bit of equilibrium to the situation. But don't underestimate how important your mood and being aware of your mood is in getting messages across and getting them to stick, both internally and externally. So we've come to the end. I hope you've enjoyed that little piece. I hope you've enjoyed the 3 different parts. We started off looking at why facts don't change people, and we learnt that the brain is a bit more complicated than most people think. Secondly, we looked at research and talked about how the methodology maybe needs to be spent more time on in terms of explaining that to the public and the power of that process. The scientific method is so powerful, and I don't believe that the public really understands that, and I'd be fascinated with your views on that. We ended with some thoughts on personal development, and I introduced you to the Rapoport process. I introduced you to the presentation process that I use, and the key things around practice and rehearsal and making sure you know what your taglines are and really focusing on getting those points across. I then gave you a technique called the Rapoport process that really helps you break down a discussion with someone that may not see the world the same as you do. I'm really looking forward to hearing your feedback from this little session, and I can't wait to hear your questions. Thanks ever so much for listening, and I look forward to hearing from you. My name is Scott MacArthur. Please have a look at my YouTube channel here. There's lots of little vignettes, little stories that I think you'd find interesting. A lot of them are scientifically based, so I hope you find them interesting, but expect poetry and art and business as well. I'm really focused on what's coming next, so I believe we're on the edge of next of quite a revolution in how we structure our organisations and how we structure our lives. So you might find some information there that you'll find useful, and I'm very open to any questions, and I really look forward to talking to you. Thank you very much. Bye bye.